So from Beirut to Baalbek, and today we are in a place called Byblos. And if you thought we had left behind all of that tedious history stuff in Baalbek, then I'm afraid you are sorely mistaken. And that is because Byblos, known locally as Jubail, just so happens to be one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on the whole planet. People have lived here non-stop for 8,000 years, and that means it has lived through pretty much every kind of civilization, from the Neolithic age through the Bronze Age, through the Persians, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, everybody. And unfortunately for you lot, that means there is an awful lot of history to be spoken about. But the most important people to have come through here, and in fact from here, because Byblos would have been the original site for them, were the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians went on from here to have enormous influence on civilization as a whole. One of the most important influences actually in the history of everything ever, and it all started here. And if you're listening to this thinking, who the bloody hell are the Phoenicians, then don't worry, because I will gladly go into great detail about them. But first of all, let's have a mooch around this city, see what it looks like at the minute. So Byblos, a place made famous by the Phoenicians, but was in fact first inhabited 5,000 or 6,000 BC. But interestingly, even when it was first settled, people still regarded it as a place of great antiquity, and so therefore thought it was from a long time even before them. But we've got no proof of that, and we've got no idea when it actually began being a place that people lived in. As you can see, they've got a marvellous beach, even if it's not quite the perfect weather for a swim. Still a pretty mint little beach, that. Almost as nice as Cleethorpes, isn't it? We've also got a pair of soggy Timberland flip-flops. I'm not sure they're 8,000 years old. And we've also got a cupboard. Is that a cupboard? Is it? And here we have the fishing port of Byblos, a little port, a lot of boats, ordinarily not all that important. However, it was actually the Phoenicians who built the first ever boat, and so they were the first people to ever sail, first people to ever go out to sea. And because this was their first city, remember, it's very likely that that happened from this very place, and for that us Grimbarians, us mariners, have a lot to thank them for. These are the original mariners, the Phoenicians, and they came from here. And look at this one, it's even got eyes on it, or boobs, could be boobs, probably eyes though, isn't it? So this is where the boat was invented. That isn't, by the way, the huge thing I was on about, that big influence of civilization, but it is still quite a big deal. That it allowed people to sail, travel, trade. And they do in fact reckon that it was the Phoenicians that reached America first, thousands of years before Christopher Columbus did, but that is a whole other story. All we need to know for now is that the Phoenicians invented mariner-ing. However, there is much more to this city than just its fishing port, and we will pick up the story of the Phoenicians a bit later on. For now, I kind of want to go and have a browse around the rest of it. In here we've got the Church of St. John Mark. Yes, another church in that country that's supposed to be totally Muslim. This was built by the Crusaders when they came through here in the 12th century. I think it was 1115 AD. It's a pretty mint one as well, actually. I don't think I've ever seen a church that rounded. It's pretty cool, that. And St. John Mark was, by the way, the guy that is said to have first supported Christianity in Byblos, and that is why when the Crusaders came through here, they decided to build that for him. And this is what it looks like on the inside. I don't know why, and I've never seen this before, but there's big Arabic tablets around the church. Yeah, I don't really know about them. They could be information boards, I suppose, but they didn't look very information-y. Never really seen that in a church before, but anyway, whatever. That is the Church of St. John Mark, built by the Crusaders to add to the mix of Byblos. And while the Crusaders were in town, they also went to the effort of building a fat little castle around the same time, 12th century, which is what we're walking into now. Oh, and there's also a little train track running under it. I don't really know where that goes. Pretty odd. And so this is what life looks like on top of a 900-year-old Crusader-built castle. And if we look down here, we're basically surrounded by a whole mix of ruins from the Romans, the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, which just goes to show how many civilizations this place has actually been through. Help! I am becoming wet. The castle was in fact just built on top of some Roman ruins as well, much like the way the Romans built on top of the Phoenicians ruins in Baalbek that we saw in the last video. And that is exactly how we can work out how old a place actually is, because it creates like a lump in the floor called a tell. Layers and layers of civilizations get built up because when someone else conquers a place, they can't be asked to clear it all away, they just build on top of it. So you carbon date the layers, you work out how old it is, and therefore you get the Byblos is in fact about 8,000 years old. Please excuse the earphone, by the way, the audio's minging right now and that is the only solution. And anyway, I've sought refuge under a bridge, so while the weather's putting a stop to our explorations, let's talk a little bit more about the Phoenicians. Firstly, they were never actually called that, nor was Byblos called Byblos. Neither of those words even existed until a very, very long time later. Originally, this city would have been called Gubla or Gebal, hence why it's called Jebel today, and the people of this area would have been the Canaanites, because this area would have been called Canaan. That's the bit that the Jews speak an awful lot about, but the Jews in Lebanon aren't mates, so let's not go there. Both words actually come from the Greeks. Byblos comes from the Greek word for papyrus, that old paper stuff, because this was an important commercial centre for the trading of papyrus, and Phoenicia or Phoenicians come from the Greek word Phoeniki, which means something along the lines of purple land, and that is because of a rare and prized commodity that this area was famous for. Anyway, whatever they were called, what did the Phoenicians actually do? Well, as we've already touched on, they were the first people to sail and they could trade as far as Europe. They were the first ship makers and they provided the ships for a lot of countries to go and have a fight in, like the Persians versus the Macedonians, for instance. The ability to sail around landed the Phoenicians in a load of different multilingual societies across Europe and Asia, and that's a bit of a problem if you've got to talk to them and negotiate. So in order to operate successfully, the Phoenicians came up with a completely unique and unheard of idea of making a system where each little symbol makes one single phonetic sound rather than having complicated hieroglyphics and so on. They decided that the noise ah needed a single symbol that everybody could recognize, and Aleph was born, B was Beth, etc., etc., and the alphabet as we know it was born. It was in the 13th century BC that the Phoenicians came up with their 22-letter system. Every single symbol was simple and memorable, and within a few hundred years, everybody was at it. It led to the creation of ancient Greek, of Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, of Latin, of every European language. Even the Indic and Brahmi scripts came from the invention of the Phoenician alphabet, which means that every single written language on earth, except for Chinese and the Far Eastern languages, came from that invention of the Phoenician alphabet. And that is the influence that they had on civilization. They let us write down words. And now that history lecture is complete, the rain has stopped and we are back amongst the ruins. And I know that not everybody likes ruins and old stuff as much as I do, so just to put it dead simply, an awfully long time ago there were two people wandering about incredibly bored. One person says to the other person, do you know what's dead stupid? It's stupid that we can't float on water, we can't carry things, and what about all those fish that we can't get to over there? And the boat was born. Second person goes, yeah, do you know what else is stupid? Hieroglyphics. Why can't we just write what we mean? Why have we got to draw pictures all the time? And so the phonetic alphabet was born, and both of those things, which changed civilization forever, probably happened somewhere around here. This whole area makes up ancient Byblos, a part of the world that civilization after civilization has been through, has lived in, and there's proof of all of it. It's never been uninhabited, and it is one of the longest inhabited places on the planet. The Persians, who played a big part in this whole area, haven't really had a mention yet. So here's the remains of what would have been a Persian temple. It's not in great condition, but they were here as well. And just before we leave this magnificent complex, I just want to touch on why the Phoenicians were named the Phoenicians, the purple people, the purple land, by the Greeks. And that is because here they were the first people to ever work out how to make purple dye, and it was that rare, it was that prized, that only royals around the world could afford it. And the murex snail, which they used to make the purple dye, is actually still used today to make natural purple dyes this many years later. And in fact, fun fact for you, that difficulty in making purple, that rarity of it, is the reason why there's not a single flag in the world that has purple on it. Not a single country's flag. How about that? And then this bit of the city is a bit more like how it would have looked under the Ottomans many years after all the ancient stuff, minus the fake shoes probably. Basically just like old Turkish looking market street things, nicely stoned and loads of old stuff around it. Kind of the thing you'll have seen if you've been to Istanbul, those kind of places, but here it just kind of adds another layer, a bit more authenticity to the amount of different peoples that have been through this area. Obviously nowadays it all just sells loads of terrible tourist nonsense, but back then in the Ottoman times and beyond, they would have sold more traditional things. They would have sold marble as well, and cedar. In fact, cedar's a big thing for Lebanon. First of all, if you look at the Lebanese flag, there is a tree on it that is not a Christmas tree, contrary to popular belief. It is a cedar tree. It's a very big symbol for Lebanon. In ancient times, the Egyptian pharaohs would have relied heavily on Lebanon cedars. They reckon that King Solomon's temple was built using Lebanon cedars. And as a fun biblical side note, in the Old Testament the word cedar is also mentioned 75 times. So not only Lebanon, as we discovered in the Beirut video, but cedar as well was a popular feature of the Old Testament. How about that? And also, I don't know if it's just me in my primary school, when I was in school we had to draw houses that like Jesus would have lived in. It was a Church of England school, so lots of biblical things. We had to draw houses, and the way we drew them was we had like just a normal house, but it had steps like this going all the way up to the actual roof of the house, and that's how they got upstairs, right? I know that sounds completely meaningless, but I think I've actually just found one. Is this it? Is this what we were drawing the whole time? There's one over there as well. There's loads of them here. Anyway, the rain is back, and I don't know about you, but I feel pretty informationed out. It's been quite intense, this one, lots of facts and history and all that, and hopefully you've learned something new about a place you might not have even known has existed before today. But either way, I think it's about bedtime. Anyway, this has been Byblos, or Gebal, or Jebel, whatever you want to call it. Either way, I think it's been a pretty interesting one. It's been a good little walk through time. But I am getting pretty soggy here, so I reckon it's about time we found a bus. Cheers boys, see you in a bit.